Hello, and tonight's presenter will be Miss Rachel Bauer over Poultry 101.
Thank you, Clay. Okay, so tonight we're going to talk about raising broilers for show, and there are several different topics that we'll cover tonight. That's just kind of the basics of raising broilers. We'll talk about housing and brooding and management of the broilers throughout the project. We're going to touch just a little bit on nutrition. I know we're going to cover nutrition more so in the next session with Dr. Sufal, but we'll just go over just some very basics. We'll also discuss culling and selection of the broilers throughout the project, as you'll need to cull down your numbers from the initial number of broilers that you receive from the hatchery. And then we're going to talk about wing bands as well, because that's an important management aspect that everyone needs to stay on top of, so those wing bands don't get grown into those wings of the birds. So those are just some of the basic topics we'll cover today. And if you've got any questions, please feel free to ask. So the types of shows that are out there today for the market broilers, some shows will offer a straight pullet class or a straight cockerel class, where all of the birds that are in your pen need to be a straight run. I'm sorry, not a straight run, but a straight pen of pullets or cockerels. You cannot have mixed sexes within those classes. And then there's also what they call a straight run show, where you can mix sexes within the pen of the 3 broilers. And you need to know what your show rules are, and to know what types of birds that you're going to be showing in those classes when it comes to show date, because that can help you within your management and your culling and selection of those broilers. Always know what your rules and regulations are, and this goes for broilers as well as all the other species of livestock. But for broilers, there will be an ordered deadline from either from your county extension office or your ag teacher or your county, where the extension agents or the ag teachers will place an order for everyone's broilers at one time from a specific hatchery. So if you're planning to show broilers, you do need to check to find out what those ordered deadlines are, because once the orders are placed with the hatchery makes arrangements to have those eggs hatched out in 21 days, and then you will pick them up when those chicks are a day old. So it's usually several months in advance of when your actual hatch date is. Validation for those birds, there's not an actual validation for those birds, because most of them are going to have wing bands that are put into their wings when they're a day old, and those numbers that are on the wing bands will be assigned to you. So those are basically registering those birds under your ownership. You will have to fill out entry forms though for your local livestock show or for the major livestock shows, so you will need to check with your ag teacher or extension agents to find out what those dates are. Always know and understand what the show regulations are. Those are posted in your show rules for local and for major shows. And if you've got questions about those, then you need to ask an advisor and find out more information, so you don't get to the show and you get there at the wrong time, or maybe you don't have a wing band in place and you get disqualified. So you need to know what the show rules are. You also need to make sure that the birds are legal for the show. There have been instances in the past where exhibitors may have had birds on feed for multiple shows at one time, and there's possibilities of the birds getting mixed up. So you need to make sure that the birds that you've got are the correct ones for that show. Know the disqualification terms of how you can get disqualified, whether it be from broken wings or bruising, or illness in the birds. Read through those rules and make sure you know what can disqualify your pen. Always know what your time and in-place deadlines are. You've got to be at the show at a certain time frame to be able to go through the sift, and you just need to be on time, and you need to be on time when you when you are going up to the show ring, basically, so you're not disqualified, because sometimes if the judge has already started judging the class, or if he's midway through it, you may not get in if you didn't get to the show ring in time. Also, there are sifting and culling rules that are stated in the rules. And these will get you disqualified if, you know, if your bird is sick, if it has a missing wing band, or if it has cuts or abrasions on its breast or on its wings. Always know what those rules are, because they will be listed for defects within those rules. Okay, now we're going to go a little bit into housing, brooding, and management. And whenever you order your chicks, you're basically, you're going to turn in your money and your order to the extension agent or to the ag teacher, and they are going to place one order for the entire chapter or the entire county from a hatchery or from Texas A&M Poultry Science Department. And when they do that, then they're going to basically take eggs from highly related hens from a hatchery source, and all of those eggs are from the same strain of birds. Basically, we usually show the Cornish rock hens, which are the white broilers, and all those eggs are taken and put in a hatcher, or put in a, I'm sorry, it's been a long day, put in an incubator, and they are hatched. And the chicks will basically be in hatcher baskets, and they're all just mixed up within those baskets. So there's not really any way to keep them separate. But when you ordered your birds, you probably ordered a specific number of 25 or 50 or 75. So the hatchery will box those birds up, and according to how many that you ordered and how many were ordered by your chapter, and they will run them through a machine on a conveyor belt, basically, that puts a vaccination, a mist in, they basically mist those birds with a type of vaccine to prevent disease and to prevent those birds from getting sick as they get older. So these are day-old chicks that are going through that vaccination conveyor belt. And then this is a picture from Texas A&M, from the Poultry Science Department, where they have students and volunteers there who are putting wing bands in those birds. So they will box them up. They'll put wing bands in the birds that will help to identify those as your batch. And then they're going to put those on racks. Now they will actually, you know, you'll get a box that's got a label on it with your name on it and the number of chicks that you're going to receive. So there is no good way to select the best box of chicks because everybody is starting out on the same playing field. All of the chicks, again, are the same strain. They're all hatched on the same day. They're from highly related hens. So basically how you manage that box from day one when you get it until the show is basically, you know, what determines how you do or how you place at the show. So it's probably one of the most fair projects that there is. So some of the keys to raising competitive show poultry basically is going to be in your management practices. It's how good of housing that you have as far as ventilation and temperature management. It's also how well you keep that house clean and ammonia free. And then you've got to provide fresh water to those birds every day. We do that twice a day because the clean, fresh water is very important for their health and for their growth. You're also going to provide them with a balanced diet. The show feeds that are out on the market now are balanced, and what we don't want you to do is end up adding a lot of different supplements to that feed because it can actually end up unbalancing that feed ration. Also, your culling and selection practices, and you know, throughout the project is going to help to reduce your numbers and and help to provide more space for those better birds. So you want to try to cull them down, you know, as you see smaller and weaker birds, to go ahead and take those out. So these are just different things that you can do to be competitive in the show ring with your poultry. So environmental management has got a lot of factors that can affect the quality of the birds. It involves housing, it involves temperature, ventilation, litter, good feed and clean water, and then cleanliness overall in the house. So we'll go over each of these aspects just briefly. So optimum housing designs can vary. There are some people who raise the birds in their garage. And I know that Extension has a publication that talks about raising show broilers, and it gives you kind of a price breakdown of what it takes to build a small enclosure, you know, where you can do that in your garage, because you don't need a whole lot of space for the broilers, but you do need something where you can control the temperature and the atmosphere in there. So the minimum requirements for housing is going to be, number one, to protect the birds from adverse environmental conditions, you know, from getting too hot or from getting too cold. And you also need to protect them from predatory animals. And that includes raccoons and skunks and possums, but it also includes house cats and dogs, pet dogs that are out in the yard, because they're larger animals, and they will prey upon chickens and baby chicks. Another important part of housing is being able to have enough ventilation that, you know, can go through that house area or through that pen area, because it helps to control the humidity, and it also helps to control the air quality. And the more ventilation that you have, especially as the chicks get older, the better off you're going to be, because you won't have the ammonia buildup, and it also helps to cool those birds to have enough ventilation within that house. A lot of times, if you don't have good airflow, where you can't get the humidity out, it can make your shavings get really sour smelling really quickly if it's too damp inside the house. So ventilation is very important. So now we're going to look at some different types of housing, and again, there's good points and bad points, you know, to a lot of different housing conditions. This picture here, they've got plastic up near the top, which they can drop down if it gets too cold. So those birds could stay warm, you know, if it gets cold outside. But the good thing about that is that they can lift the plastic and be able to have airflow coming in across those birds. They've also got a divider in the middle of the house, where they may have pullets on one side and cockerels on the other. But they can at least divide out their birds if they need to, even when they're culling, or just to grow those birds out. This is another house design that's nice. It's got eaves that overhang enough to where it can block some wind or some rain that may be trying to blow in. They've also got the plastic up on the wire to where they can drop that plastic to keep rain from blowing in, or to keep those birds warm if they needed to. It's a very open airflow. It's probably better than the previous picture that we showed, because wind and air movement can go all the way through that house to keep those birds clean. They've got their feeders hanging in there, the tube feeders, and it's a nice clean pen that's easily accessible. There's not a lot of vegetation around it that may block airflow, so this is a good example of a nice pen as well. Here's a pen that's built on the back side of a house, and it's got a lot of vents around the top of it to help let warm air out, and then the sides, or you're able to prop those up. I feel like houses that have airflow going over the top of the birds, kind of at their level, helps to cool them better. So that's one aspect of this that could be beneficial, because you can lift those flaps and the air can come right across the top of the birds. Probably a negative thing on this is that it's not open on all 4 sides to where you could have airflow move all the way through the house. Okay, this is a nice picture of a house here with the ventilation fan that's on the back wall. You don't have to have a ventilation fan like this, but it does help to move air and ammonia out of that house. They've got plastic up on the sides of the wire where they can drop that. And with the ventilation fan in place, or exhaust fan, that could actually pull air in through those sides and then provide more fresh air into that house. Let's see, they've also got their feeders and their waters that are hanging there at the level that the chickens need to be eating out of. They've got a space heater over on the side of the slide here on the side of the wall. Those are optional. The thing to remember about any type of space heaters or any type of heat lamps that you're providing in the house, you need to make sure that they are very well secured so that they don't end up dropping or falling into the shavings and then starting a fire and just ruining your project for that year. But this is a nice house. Your houses don't have to be this extravagant, basically. But this is, if you were starting from afresh, this would be a good house to be able to raise broilers and to control that temperature really well, and the ventilation. This is a storage, like a storage barn or the side of a barn that's almost totally enclosed, and they've got plenty of space in here for the broilers. I think one of the downfalls of this is that it could get very hot in there unless you've got an air conditioner that would help to cool the air whenever the birds or if the temperature outside is warm and the birds would get warm. There are 2 windows in here, but they are up high, and I don't think that there would be enough ventilation in this house to be able to keep it cool, even with the fan up in there. But it is a nice house as far as the space that the birds have. Here's another house that's open on all 4 sides. It's a little bit older of a house, but it's very clean inside. Again, there's the plastic up on the sides of the walls where they can drop that to help monitor the temperature of the house. They've got a light in there for some light for the birds and for heat as well. So they've got their shavings. Notice at the bottom of the house, it is lined with plastic. And we do recommend that you use a plastic, especially if you're just on dirt, if the floor of your house is dirt. That way, when it starts to rain, you don't have moisture that seeps up under these shavings and gets your shavings wet, because they will mildew and sour very quickly. So even if you've got a concrete floor for your pens, ours is concrete in our house, and we always put down plastic as well, just to help with bacteria and disease, from flock to flock each year, because it's very easy to buy that plastic sheeting, lay it down, and then put your shavings on top of it. It just makes it easier to clean up. So this is a nice example of a house too. A little older, but that's okay. Those work just as well. So here are just some comparisons of what good housing is and what it may not be or is not. The picture that's on the left is one that we saw in the first slide that I showed on housing, and then the one on the right hand side is not good housing. The pen structure like this, they've got a wide roof on it to help keep rain from coming in, but that is not enough space for the birds to be able to grow out, and we don't want those birds on wire either. They need to be on shavings, and this is just not nearly enough space, because as those birds grow, you need to provide 2 to 3 square foot per broiler when they're 6 weeks old, to be able to have enough space to be able to optimize their growth. Okay, here's another picture of our older turkey house that's on the left-hand side. It could be a broiler house as well. It's a perfect structure for being able to grow out those birds. What we don't want to have is to have those turkeys on, or well, these are turkeys in the picture, but to have any broilers on rough terrain. These birds are walking over rocks to try to get to their feed, to get to their feeders, and that can cause severe leg injuries to broilers, and also can cause bruising and cuts or abrasions on the breast, or even broken wings if they, if they flap their wings and hit one of those rocks. So we don't want that in our housing. We've got an example of good housing on the left again, with this is kind of a homemade feeder, but it works. With the pan on the bottom, it's hung to where those birds can eat from that feeder at their breast or back height. Their water is in there also. That's an automatic water, but you can set the plain old red and white jugs on some blocks to be able to lift those as well, as that's just as effective as hanging those. On the right hand side is not good housing also. They don't have proper shelter to be able to get under, and they are on just dirt. So we'd like to have better shelter for those birds to be able to get out of the elements, and you can't keep them warm if they're under something like this. Okay, so moving on into setting up your house, and you need to be ready before the birds come in. So basically your house needs to be set up at least 1 week before you get your birds, and you need to have your shavings in there and have it heated at least 3 days before the birds come in. And the reason that we recommend that you put the heat lamps in there is to help heat those shavings so those birds don't get chilled, because they're going to be on the shavings. If you've got a concrete floor, concrete is much cooler than what dirt is, and the heat is going to help to keep those birds from getting chilled initially whenever they get there. So you need to have those heat lamps in place and have some thermometers out there so you know that that flooring is 90 to 92 degrees before you ever hatch, or not before you hatch, but before you get those birds in. So also be sure and watch the temperatures. We put thermometers out on the floor in our brooder ring, just so that we know, what the temperature is, so we know whether to raise or to lower those heat lamps. But start recording those temperatures and really paying attention to that about a day before you get those birds in. We add feed and water a few hours before we get the chicks in, because that helps to get those feed pans and the feed and water kind of more of a warmer temperature, and I lost my train of thought there, sorry. So have the feed and water in the pens a few hours before you get the chicks in, again, just to get that acclimated to that 90-degree temperature, so it's not a cold shock, if they go up to the water and drink really cold water that's straight out of the faucet. It helps to warm that up so it's not a shock to their system. So the water temperature needs to be about 80 degrees for the first week. You don't want to just go get it straight out of the faucet outside or out of the sink and fill up those waters. Keep it kind of at a lukewarm temperature, about 80 degrees. So once you get your house set up and your feeders and your waters out there, we also recommend that you use vitamins and electrolytes for the first 48 to 72 hours after the birds arrive. I know that A&M has started recommending that once you get your birds home, that you have them on just plain water for several hours, just to help them to get rehydrated just with plain water, and then you can put your vitamins and electrolytes in the water for 48 to 72 hours after that. And that makes sense as well. So I think that's a good idea. I know people that do it both ways, where they start out initially with vitamins and electrolytes, and some that are following the recommendations of A&M, and I think it works both ways. Antibiotics, we don't usually use antibiotics just as a general rule unless the birds are sick or have a respiratory or a bacterial infection. So it's a good idea just to have some on hand just in case you might need it before you get your birds in. But vitamins and electrolytes, you definitely need to have and use those when you first get the birds in. Yeah, the last statement on here, the preventative measure for these products aren't any benefit to the bird. I've heard of some people that have used vitamins and electrolytes for, you know, long periods of time, like, you know, 5 to 10 days at a time, or they want to keep them on there the entire time. And you can't do that, because providing that amount of vitamins and electrolytes consistently can exacerbate feet and leg problems in the birds. And there's already vitamins that are in the feed as well, and those are balanced rations. We just want to provide the vitamins and electrolytes right after arrival, because that's a stress time. And you can also run vitamins and electrolytes through the birds when you do your cull, and run that through them for about 24 hours after you cull, just to kind of get them through that stress period, because you've held them up, you've been moving them around, they've been felt of, and then you're putting them back down, and it just stresses those birds out. So we do recommend it for about a 24-hour time frame after you cull. Okay, so this is a picture of the baby chicks whenever you first get them home from the pickup site on the first day. And generally what we do is to make sure the birds, we take each bird and dip their beaks in the water trough about 2 or 3 times, just to make sure that they know that that's where the water is, and that way we know that they've gotten some water, and they learn very quickly. So once you dip their beak in there, they'll usually go ahead and drink a little bit more, and then you can put them on the floor of your brooder or in your brooder ring in your house, and they'll run around and they'll go over to the feed pan and start scratching around and start pecking. So that's just their nature, and they start that very, very quickly. Here's another picture. This is my son, and he's checking the birds once he gets them in, and we've got our water trough there with our electrolytes in it, and basically we dip their beaks in there 2 to 3 times, make sure they get a good drink, and then we put them in the brooder ring, which is this metal ring here. Brooder rings just help keep those chicks more confined during the first 3 to 4 days, just to make sure that they stay warm enough and that they are getting acclimated to that house and to eating the feed and drinking water. So we've got a thermometer there on the floor of that brooder ring, and there's a sheet, just a flat bed sheet that we put on top of the shavings and put that brooder ring on top of. I feel like that helps them to keep them from eating the shavings and having any issues from pecking on the shavings, because I want them to eat the feed and get filled up on that, and to learn what that is before they start just pecking around in shavings. So you can usually take the sheet out after 3 to 5 days. It kind of depends on what you want to do. The sheet does get messy as they defecate on it, and it gets a little bit damp just from the water as well. And we scrape that and sweep that up with a little sweep broom and pan, and clean that off. And then after 3 to 5 days, you can take that sheet out, and the chicks will be fine, because they know what feed is and what water is by that time. So feed types and feeding. Basically, you want to have fresh, clean feed out continually for those chickens. As they start to eat that down throughout the day, then you need to add feed back to that, add fresh feed to that pan. Change out the feed about every 3rd day, because you want to keep the feed fresh that's in there for those birds to eat, because we want to keep them gaining and really going after that feed and eating it. Sometimes the feed, the crumbled feed, will get powdery, you know, after it's been in a feeder for 2 to 3 days, and you want to dump that powder out and replace it with fresh feed with the crumbles. As those chicks grow, you want to raise the feeders and the waters to be even with the backs of the birds throughout the growing period. So as they grow, you lift those feeders and the waters, because you want them to be able to just to eat and drink from those feeders and waters, and to stand up when they're doing it. A lot of times, the bigger the birds are, the lazier they get, and they'll want to just go up and sit down or plop down at the feeder or at the water, and they'll eat or drink. And then they'll end up, sometimes they'll end up laying on one side more than another, and that will cause slab-sidedness of the breast. So basically, we would like to have them up and moving around and eating and drinking more so than we want them laying around, because they do get lazy as they get bigger and older. We basically go out and top feed off every time we go in the chicken house, just to provide those chicks with an opportunity to get up and to eat some fresh feed. Every time that you go out and move those birds around, it's going to make them basically get up, and they're either going to go eat or they're going to go drink. So the more you can be out there in the chicken house and moving them around, the better. For feeders and waters, we recommend the tube and pan feeders. Those work really well, and you can actually set the spacing, you know, whether you're feeding crumbles or pellets, and that fresh feed will fall out, you know, as the birds eat. Again, keep the waters and feeders adjusted to the shoulder height of the birds. Always rinse your waters daily. So when you go in the pens to feed in the morning and at night, dump the water and replace it with fresh water. We recommend that you do scrub those waters at least once a week, because they will start getting slimy on the inside of the jug and also in the pan. And it's just from the feed, you know, that's in the bird's mouth, and they'll go to get a drink of water and some crumbles will fall in there. So it just gets kind of slick and slimy from bacterial growth. So you do want to clean those out, and you can use a Clorox wipe, you know, and then rinse that out really well, and then put it back in the chicken house. And again, fresh feed and water has got to be available at all times. I've seen pens when I would go out and help some of our poultry feeders to call their birds or to check their birds throughout the growing period. And I had one family where one child was very diligent about making sure that they had enough water and feed in the pen, and the other child, their water would run out every afternoon, basically. And there was a considerable size difference between the two pens of chickens, just because of the availability of fresh feed and water, because the one child was taking care of hers and the other one was not. So for the feeders and waters, basically our minimum recommendations is 25 birds per feeder and 15 birds per water. And actually, I would even say cut that in half, because I think you need to provide plenty of feed and plenty of opportunities for water for those birds to be able to just wherever they walk, you know, within 3 feet or so, they've got an opportunity to eat or an opportunity to drink. And then supplemental feeders and waters for brooding. You do need to, as those birds grow, once they start out in the brooder ring, you know, you'll start out with feed on the sheet, basically for them to peck on, and you've got your smaller feed pans in there, but begin putting in more feeders and waters as those birds continue to grow. And as you know, after a week or so, then you'll get them out of the brooder ring and let them out into the chicken house, and to give them more space to grow. So this is just an example of some of the spacing. You know, after a week or so, we'll open them up into larger areas of the chicken house and just expand that every day or two to give them more space as they grow. Feeder space is crucial. We talked about the numbers. So if the picture on the left with the feed pan that's got the little holes on top with the lid, don't use those for show broilers. Those birds, as they grow, they're too big and they just cannot get enough access, open access to the feed that's in those, in that bottom tray, because it's covered on top. The picture on the right is optimal. It's just a feed pan with crumbles in there, but those birds can eat as much as they want because it's wide open and there's no hindrance to be able to get to that feed. And it's also easy for you to be able to add feed to that type of a tray. Here's another example of a chicken house. These people have got some dividers in there, and they've got pullets and cockerels divided out, and they've also got sections, they had more than one child, so that's why they had this divided out the way that they did, but it works really well. This is a good picture of a chicken house as far as the optimal ventilation, because it's open around all four sides, and then they've got their feeders and their waters up in the air. This one's just got the water up on blocks, and that works just fine as long as it's sturdy or steady enough to where it's not going to get knocked over. That will work very well. But those chickens, the shavings are clean. Those chickens are well feathered and they look really good. So ventilation and temperature, we've talked a little bit about that, but if you watch how the birds act, then if they act cold, if they're crowding up, or kind of, especially when they're smaller, if they're in a cluster, they're cold. And you really need to get some heat on those birds because that can set them back. Hot birds will migrate away from each other and migrate away from the heat source. If they're all around the outside ring of the brooder, outside part of the brooder ring, they may be just really hot and they're trying to get away from those heat lamps. So you may have to raise those heat lamps or do something to, to make that a little bit cooler in there. Comfortable birds, if you think about putting some salt on your food, and you're just sprinkling it, those birds will be scattered or sprinkled throughout the brooder ring or throughout the house if they're comfortable. Hot birds, if they get really hot as they get older, you'll see them pant. They'll also hold their wings out from their body because their wings are actually holding in body heat. So they'll have their wings kind of held out from their body just to be able to try to cool off. So they should be optimally just moving around throughout the chicken house and scattered out through there and moving in and around to be able to get to feed and water. These are the bird temperature requirements as they grow. So at week 1, you want to start out with that chicken house and those shavings being right around 92 degrees. And it can range from 90 to 94. Just watch the behavior of the birds. And it depends on what your temperature is outside, and how easy it is to keep your house cool or warm. So the brooding temperature is actually the floor temperature, of the shavings. And that's at 12 inches measured from the center of the light. So at week 1, it's around 92 degrees, and then you want to drop it about 5 degrees per week until those birds, are at week 5, basically. So if you follow this rule of thumb and if you watch the behavior of the birds, you should be in good shape. You don't ever want the birds to get really cold or really hot because it can set them back, with their feeding and with their weight gain. So this is what I was talking about with the birds being cold. Even though this little lamp is right here above them, those birds are clustered together because they're trying to stay warm, and they can actually smother each other, and you can have some death loss when this occurs too. So you do need to check the birds frequently to be able to monitor that temperature and monitor the behavior of the birds. We usually try to get in the house every 2 hours to be able to check them. And when they're young, just a few a few days old, we're out there more often than that to double check them. So birds that are comfortable are just scattered about in the brooder ring. This is a different example of a brooder ring that's cardboard, and it works just fine. But they've got their lights hung in there, and then their feeder. You can't see the water in the picture, but this is a good brooder ring structure, and the spacing of the birds is good. Here's another one that's larger, and they've got some burlap bags. You know, we use sheets, but burlap bags work just as well too, to be able to put down in the base of the brooder ring area. And they've got a lot of feeders and a lot of waters out for these chicks. And then they've got the brooder lamp that's up above with 3 to 4 heat lamps in it. And those are nice too if you've got a larger area. They work really well because they're on thermostats. So that's a really nice setup as well. Maybe the only thing that I could see that could be detrimental would be if there would be a draft in there. The sides of this are perforated, so it would allow for more airflow through there, because you don't want to have drafts or wind on those birds when they're small, because it can chill them. But if that's an enclosed building, then you're not going to have to worry about that. Here's another good example of the temperature being right. The birds are a little bit older here, but they're scattered about, you know, some sitting in the feed pans and around the feed pans, but this is an adequate temperature within this chicken house. There's also a thermostat that's hung here from the side of the wall on the right-hand side to help control temperature. The thermometers should be actually about 6 inches above the floor in order to accurately measure the temperature at the bird's level. So these are hung up within the pen, and they work really well. Then here's an example of incorrect thermometer use. This is over by the door. It's on the wall, and it's up, you know, it's up high. It's probably 3 to 4 foot up on the wall. So that's not going to give you an accurate temperature of what the birds are feeling down below. This is a picture of a roof of a chicken house, and with the PVC pipe. And this, if you've got an automatic water system in your pen, this can be good as long as you don't have a water break in your pipes, or a main break in your pipes. But having this inside the house can also help warm that water that's in those pipes to more of a room temperature, a warmer temperature. Air conditioning can work in the houses as well. I think you don't want to raise birds totally enclosed with an air conditioner all the time, unless you've just got a really clean house, because you can get an ammonia buildup very quickly with that. And unless you've got summertime birds for like a September or October show, where you might have to have the air conditioner in there as those birds get older to be able to cool them off. But I wouldn't recommend you running it 24 hours a day, because I think at night you can probably still open up the house enough to be able to allow those birds to get out, you know, to be at a room at an environmental temperature, and not be in an air conditioner all the time. Because when you take them out of the house and take them to the show, it's not air conditioned most likely in the show barn, and that can cause some real heat stress on those birds because they're not used to it. So I would recommend, if you're going to use an air conditioner, to just use it during the heat of the day, maybe from noon until 7 o'clock, and you know, and then turn it off and let them have some fresh airflow. For the litter in the house, you want to put down about 4 to 6 inches of a good quality litter. Pine wood shavings are probably one of the most available out there, and they work very well. They're easy to change out, and they're not extremely expensive. Some areas where rice is grown, that they do use rice hulls, and those can be good bedding as well. Coarse dry sawdust can be used, but it can get pretty dusty. Other people will use washed builder sand, and that works very well also. as long as it's not too wet or too damp. You need to stir the litter daily after a couple of weeks of age to prevent it from becoming wet and packed. It also gets really dirty if you don't stir it. So as you stir the litter, the manure is going to fall to the bottom, and it's going to help to fluff those shavings. So it will help keep those birds cleaner. It will also help prevent breast blisters because the litter will stay drier. And it helps prevent scalier skin because if those shavings are moist, it can just cause a lot of issues with the birds. If you ever knock over a water or spill water in there, you need to remove those wet shavings and replace it with dry. And if the shavings are really compacted, you need to change out your shavings as well. As far as cleaning out your house, you probably need to do that just you know, as it's needed. There's not really a defined schedule. The more birds that you have in the house, the more frequently you're probably going to have to clean out or change out shavings, because if you walk into that house and you smell ammonia at your level, you know, imagine what it's going to be like down at the bird's level. It's going to be much stronger. So you need to monitor the ammonia and the air quality in the house. And if it gets pretty rough and it makes your eyes water when you walk in, you need to change out those shavings. So maintain dry litter. The wet litter, again, encourages ammonia. You can get insects in there also, or fire ants, and also bacteria. This is a picture of a girl stirring the litter in their chicken house. Basically, she's got her rubber boots on, and you just kind of scoot your feet all the way down to the bottom of the floor and just chug through it, you know, and turn those shavings. And then you level them back out with a, you know, with a rake or a fork. Just it helps to fluff them. It helps to kind of air them out and keep them drier. And then the manure falls to the bottom. So there she is, leveling everything back out. As you get your feeders placed higher in your waters, a lot of times you won't even have to take your feeders and waters out to be able to do that. Another important aspect, I think, of being out in the chicken house and spending time out in the chicken house and keeping the birds moved and stirred around is also just to get the birds to know you, because you can definitely tell birds that have not been handled or haven't been messed with very much because they're very flighty and just they act silly. You know, these two girls here are out there and the birds are kind of gathered up in the corner, but the more you can touch those birds or pet them and handle them a little bit, then the more gentle that they'll become, and they won't be so alarmed when you go to try to catch them. Floor space, basically, you want to start the birds in the house where they're going to grow and live. You don't want to start them in one area and then move them to a different house or to a different location if at all possible, just because of preventing stress on the birds. You do not want to reduce floor space as the bird numbers decrease. Basically, you want to, your goal in culling birds is to create, you know, more room for the good birds that you need to be able to grow and to put on more muscling and to be able to provide more feeder and water space by culling the birds out. So mortality also, you know, helps you to increase floor space. You don't want your birds to die, but you are more than likely going to lose some, and that's also a factor in your floor space. So you want to have about 2 square feet per chick up to 4 weeks of age, and then you're going to cull the birds at between 3 and 4 weeks of age for your first hard cull. That's going to increase your square footage for your good birds, your keeper birds. As those birds grow and when they get closer to show, you're going to need to have at least 3 to 4 square feet per bird after 4 weeks of age up to the show. So I think this is a good visual of just how big those chicks get from day 1 up until the show. And this is a 2-foot square material just to show you how much space that they actually need. So we're recommending, 3 to 4 square feet per bird once they get fully grown. So be sure and have plenty of space for them. So here's a pen here that's built in someone's garage, and it, I'm sure it works fine, but there's not enough floor space in that cage or in that pen area for those birds. They're crowded, and they will be crowded as they continue to grow. This is a good picture of plenty of floor space for the birds. So the more floor space you can provide, the better. We want to have the adequate air movement basically throughout the pens to be able to supply fresh air to those birds as they're growing. It's going to help to dry out any moisture that may be in the shavings or just in the atmosphere there if you've got good airflow. And then it helps to control ammonia and bacterial growth in those shavings. If you walk into a house, again, that's got a lot of ammonia in it, you're going to know it immediately. But I'll always think about how the birds feel, being down there on those shavings, and how stout the ammonia can be at that level. Lighting programs for the broilers, you want to be on continuous lighting 24 hours a day. All you need in the house is a 40-watt light bulb. You don't have to have real bright lights in there. A 40-watt bulbs will suffice. Use incandescent or fluorescent lights, and then make sure that the lighting in the house is distributed evenly so you don't have dark spots or shadows, because the birds will not go to those areas. So you want to be able to maximize your entire floor space in the house. So make sure that your lighting is adequate all throughout. As far as exercising the birds, you don't have an exercise program for show broilers. You want to make them get up and move around because that's going to help them to just get up, and they're going to eat and they're going to drink every time that they get up. So just moving those birds around every couple of hours, is going to provide them plenty of movement and so-called exercise to be able to help them to grow optimally. If you overstimulate the birds, and get them up and really move them around, and sometimes littler kids will want to go out and exercise the birds. It can stress them, and you can lose the birds as they get older because they can't take that much stress and movement. So proper care of the birds should provide enough exercise for optimal growth and development, and that includes stirring the litter, cleaning the waters, and attending to the feed every couple of hours. And we want to encourage those birds to move to prevent abnormal growth of the birds, and to promote feed consumption. The abnormal growth on the birds, basically, when we're talking about that, is if they will sit down or lie down too much, and if they're not moved around enough, they can get slab-sided, where one side of the breast is flatter than the other, and it can happen very easily. When you're growing your birds out and you're getting ready for the show, a long time ago you used to wash broilers, but we don't do that anymore. Basically, if you keep the environment clean and keep the shavings stirred and keep the shavings clean, those birds will keep themselves pretty clean. At the show, you may have to clip off some feathers that may have some manure that may be hanging on them, but don't wash the poultry. It's too risky as far as bruising a wing or breaking a wing, or bruising the meat, and you don't want that to happen because they don't like water. Nutritional requirements we're just going to touch on just real quickly. Basically, the genetics of all these birds is the same, and how you treat those birds with their environment, with the amount of feed and the clean water that they get, and with the care and making those birds move around is going to determine whether or not you can get up to Grand Champion or a placing slot for the sale. Basically, your actions are going to determine your success. To be a champion, the birds have got to be fed to their genetic potential. You've got to push them, basically, and make them eat. So you've got to be out in the chicken house frequently. They're not, just remember that they're not going to grow beyond their genetic potential, but your job is to maximize the genetic potential of that bird by pushing the feed and the fresh water. So just the principles of good nutrition are to grow, the birds have to eat and drink. And to grow well, they're going to have to eat the right things. So feeding a balanced show ration is going to be your best bet as far as getting those birds to eat and grow well. The birds have to grow in a balanced way in order to win. And part of this is the feeding mechanism and moving those birds around. And keeping those feed rations balanced, basically using those good show rations to be able to get those birds to grow. To unbalance a balanced ration is bad. You don't want to be adding so many supplements to a feed that it's going to unbalance the feed ration. So again, principle 1, we're just going to go through these pretty quickly because I know we're running short on time, but the birds have to eat and drink, and this is going to come into play with proper husbandry and proper care, making sure there's fresh, clean water and clean feed available at all times. So at a temperature of about 75 degrees, the birds are going to consume twice as much water by weight as feed. Okay, so it's very important to have both feed and water out there at all times. Things that can inhibit your intake would be inadequate water. In order to keep eating, the birds are going to have to drink, and to be able to it's just like you eating food and not having enough water to drink with it. So that can inhibit your intake of your feed as if you don't have enough water. Always look at the feed when you get it out of the bag, smell it, make sure it's not stale or rancid, make sure it doesn't have mold in it or chunks in it. You can take those feed bags back to the feed store and they'll trade it back in for you, because it's, if it came that way right after you open the bag and you see that in there, they'll exchange it. Also, if the birds are diseased, if they have respiratory problems or if they're sick, that's going to inhibit their intake of food and water. And if the birds are too hot, it's just like you. If it's 98 degrees outside and you've been working outside or been out in the heat, you don't feel like eating. You want to drink something because you're thirsty, but you won't feel like eating. So make sure it's not too hot in the chicken house. So principle number 2, the birds have to eat and grow in a balanced way. They're going to eat a certain amount of food each day to meet their energy requirements, and that's it. It's just the same thing with people. Too much energy in the diet can lead to deficiencies in other areas. And this is where it kind of comes into play with the different supplements that are out there on the market. I would talk to someone that uses, if you know that they use some supplements, talk to them and see what they do and how they feed it, if they're successful. The biggest thing that exhibitors run into, I think, is that they'll start out with their feed, with their regular feed ration, and the chickens are doing okay, and then they add supplement A and they get some results and they start growing and look a little bit better. Then they add something else to it, and maybe the birds might increase a little bit or do a little bit better, and then they want to start adding something else, and once you've added so many supplements, you've totally unbalanced that ration, and you can actually have the performance of your birds drop off. So good intentions can have bad results. I would just be very cautious when you're using supplements, and make sure that you know how to use them, and talk to somebody that does use them and knows how to do that to be able to advise you. So again, the birds have to eat to meet their energy requirements. Be sure and change the feeds at appropriate times, and watch out for fancy programs that want to sell you a lot of supplements to be able to make your birds spectacular. Sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't, but the balanced feed ration is always going to be your number one thing that you need to stay on. Supplemental feeding can be done for broilers. There are a lot of people that will put boiled egg yolk and sprinkle that on top of the feed, or use some type of a wet feed mix, and that can be done. The biggest thing to remember is that if you use those, you need to put out only what the birds will eat in about 30 minutes and then take it up, because that can spoil and become rancid and can actually make the birds go off feed if it goes bad and they're eating it. So there's not really a secret to good nutrition. It's just using a good quality feed ration. Okay, culling. Normally, when you got your pen of broilers, you're going to cull those birds at 3 to 4 weeks of age for the first hard cull. So culling just means that you're taking out any crippled or unthrifty chicks that that just aren't doing as well and they're not getting as big. Take those out as soon as you start seeing them acting like they're a little depressed, or acting like they're just not doing as well, or if they're a lot smaller than the others, go ahead and take those birds out, because it creates more space for your better birds. It reduces competition at the feeders and waters, and reduces the manure and moisture load on the litter. Overcrowded birds sometimes you can have problems with cannibalism. So if you can keep those numbers down as you get those smaller birds that start popping up, go ahead and take those out. That helps to prevent cannibalism. It can also help prevent any disease problems, especially if those birds are starting to act sickly. Go ahead and get them out of the main pen. And it also reduces your feed expense. So when you start culling for your initial selection, I know that some people cull by weight and size, but if you do that in an early age, before you can tell what sex the birds are, you can cull out some of your good females, because the females are always going to be smaller than the males. So just be cautious in that. If you've got an all rooster show, or if your goal is to just show roosters, then I guess go ahead and cull out all your females, but just be cautious in doing it by weight only. So with the broilers, you're going to reduce your bird numbers at 3 to 4 weeks of age. Take out those birds that are smaller and maybe not as fleshy, or they don't have as much muscling in their breast. And your goal at that point is to keep 2 or 3 birds for each one to be shown. So if you've got a pen of 3 birds, then if you kept three birds for each one that will be shown, then you would be keeping back 15 birds. So we usually keep back a few more than that, just because we figure that you're going to take an alternate or 2 alternates to a show, just in case you would have a bird die or have a broken wing. So we usually keep around 20 to 22 birds per sex to be able to go to the show when we do our first cull. So basically, you're going to start culling the cockerels, and then you can go through your pullets. So we do it by sex. We'll do the cockerels first, and then go through our pullets and cull down numbers from there. So basically, you're going to look for the same qualities and characteristics as whenever you select that pen for the show. So you're going to look at their length of breast, the width of breast, the depth of the body, and then whether that breast muscle tapers. These are some pictures of some cockerels and some pullets, just so you can see the difference in the comb size and the wattle size. Even their head shape is a little bit different. The cockerels usually have a wider head and bigger legs and feet. When the broilers are judged, this is kind of a percentage breakdown of what the judges are looking for. They're looking at they give confirmation about 30% consideration, fleshing or amount of muscle 45%, finish on the birds or the amount of fat cover is about 5%, and then uniformity of those pens is about 20%. So you do need to make sure that your birds are sexed correctly for some of our county shows, if they've got a cockerel class and a pullet class, you definitely need to make sure that you've got, a straight run, a non-straight run. You want to have a strictly 3 cockerels or strictly 3 pullets in that class, or you'll get kicked out. So fleshing, just some definitions there. Fleshing is the amount and distribution of muscle. The breast should look like a giant U, or even if you think about a brick, you want that breast to be wide and long and to not taper. And then conformation just refers to the body shape of the bird overall. So that's its length, depth, width, and then its balance. Uniformity, the 3 birds in the set should be pretty similar in their conformation, in their fleshing, and their size. Some judges are different with this also. Some really don't care about uniformity that much. They put more emphasis on the amount of meat that's in those pen of 3 birds. But you may ask around, before your show and find out what that judge likes, because there are some differences in the way some of the judges select their pens for placing. The finish on the birds basically is the amount of fat that's deposited under the skin. And pigmentation, it used to be, people used to think that the more yellow the bird's legs were, the better it was, but pigmentation is really not looked at all anymore in the judging process. So picking up and holding the birds, you need to have enough people when you're selecting your show pen to be able to hold the birds up. And that way you can go through those birds quickly and take out the ones that aren't good enough, and then pick your pen of 3 and then your alternates. You want to try to do that accurately, but as quickly as you can, so you're not holding those birds upside down for too long. So the proper way to pick up a bird is to turn that bird towards you, with his head towards you. Put your hands over their wings, your thumbs over the top of their back, and then you can lift those birds up and be able to get a hold of their legs quickly, but it keeps them from flapping their wings so much, so you don't cause any injury or damage to a wing. So when you're selecting those birds, you're looking at the length of the keel, which is that breastbone, and the width of the breast. You can also, really wide birds are going to be really wide across the back also. So it's just that volume and capacity of the bird. So you look at the depth of the bird also, the body depth, basically how wide that bird is and how much body cavity it has. The bigger birds have a larger body cavity and more breast muscle. Then you're looking at the taper of the birds, which just means how much it maybe comes to a point, closer towards the legs. So that's the taper of the bird. We don't want much taper in our show birds. This is just an example of the amount of breast muscle in the bird that's on the left-hand side, and then compared to the one on the right. We've got much more width and much more body capacity in that bird on the right. On the left in the slide. You can also tell by the judge's hand here just how much taper that the bird has that's on the left-hand side. The bird that's on the right-hand side is much larger and wider. The same thing in this picture here. You can just see how much meat there is on the breast of each one of those birds just by the width of the person's hand. You can also tell the taper, or the pointedness of the breast as it gets closer to the backside of the animal. So you do not want taper. So birds that look like this, that stand really wide, there's a lot of breast meat in those birds. So these are the ones that produce the most amount of meat and muscle. These are the ones that you'd like to have in your pen. When you pick your pen of 3 birds, there's multiple ways that you can mark your pen of 3. We used to use leg bands an awful lot. Now a lot of people just will take a Sharpie marker or some spray paint and put a dot of paint or a couple of dots or circles on their head or on their back to be able to mark their pen. The only problem with the leg bands was that the birds didn't like it, being around their leg, and they would peck at it, and it would kind of irritate them a little bit. So I think that's why a lot of people have gone to just using Sharpie markers or paint now. These two girls they've got some birds in the box down here on the ground, and they're going through and checking their birds, for wing bands, and then also for any bruises or cuts or tears, just to make sure that they don't get disqualified. Then they're loading their box up into the vehicle, and I realize this is a very old slide, but it works. So they've got a Pampers box there. It's just a good cardboard box. The bottom is taped so it doesn't fall out whenever you lift it, and then the birds fall out and get injured. And they're loading it into the vehicle. It is important to have some holes cut into the side of the boxes to be able to allow for airflow, to be able to keep those birds cool also, because with the top closed, they put out a lot of body heat and they can get hot very quickly. So there's different methods, of boxes and transporting those birds. When you get to the show, there are different things that can cause you to be sifted, and you need to see your show rules and know what they are. But if you've got any bruises on the breast or on the wings, or any broken wings, those can be causes for being sifted or getting that bird sifted, and then you would have to bring in one of your alternates. Any cuts or tears or abnormalities in the skin can cause, can get you sifted. A disjointed or a bruised wing or a broken wing is an issue. Being slab-sided or having the uneven breast muscle, and that's from the birds laying on one side more than the other, can get you sifted as well. Any infestations of parasites like lice in the birds or mites those can spread to other birds, so they don't want those at the show. If the birds aren't feathered very well, or if there's any deformities in that bird, like a skeletal abnormality, those could be causes for being sifted. So this is a set of 3 really good birds. They look very uniform. They're all very wide. And if you can have a set like this to be able to go to a show with, hopefully you're doing really well. So just to review the basic management, you want to make sure that you have enough floor space for the birds from day 1 all the way up to the end of the project. Make sure that you're feeding a higher quality show feed. Make sure that you have enough feed space for those birds to have adequate access to feed at all times that's fresh. You wanted to make sure that your temperature in the house is the correct temperature all the way throughout the feeding period for the age of the bird. Remember, we start out at about 92 degrees and then drop 5 degrees per week from there. Your ventilation is important to help control the ammonia and to control the temperature in the house. And then having a good quality litter and stirring it daily is going to be essential to help to raise good birds. Walk around those birds and get in the chicken house as often as you can, just to get them used to you, but to also encourage them to get up and move around and to eat. Make sure that your feeders and waters are adjusted to the back height or breast height of those birds, and clean out those waters daily, and make sure that they have fresh water. Make sure that your lighting is appropriate in the house, just so that you don't have dark spots or shadows that the birds, aren't going to go into just because it's a darker area. It's also going to just help to keep them alert and active longer if it's light in that house. Call at the 3 to 4 week age to be able to make your first major call, but then even before that, if you have weak or sickly birds, be sure and take those out to be able to make more floor space. And then be observant of your birds. If there's something wrong in the chicken house, or if they're too hot or too cold, they're going to tell you. So just sit there and watch those birds and pay attention to their behavior. Okay, so that's all I have on raising show birds. But the other thing that we sometimes tend to forget, I've got a few slides here on wing bands. The wing bands are the metal bands that are put in the bird's wings at day 1 to be able to identify those birds as, you know, to a certain exhibitor. So the wing bands are put in the wing web on day 1 before you pick them up, and it's inserted in between the ribs there in the wing web, and they basically fold those over and then pinch it with a pair of pliers. Basically, that little rivet is pinched down, and then what they'll do, you can see the number there on that wing band. The rivet is closed and it's circular and smooth, so it's been put in correctly. And then the wing bands should be pinched. So this is a good picture of a wing band that's pinched in the middle. The reason that they do that on day 1 is to keep that band from moving around in that wing too much. It just keeps it in place better, and that wing band won't wrap around that wing during the first week. I know there's been some issues at times where the wing bands don't get pinched before you pick them up. So you do need to check that maybe as you're getting those birds out of the box and getting them their drinks of water before you put them in the brooder ring. Double check that wing band and make sure that it's pinched like this so you don't have issues. So when the wing band is not pinched, this is a picture of what happens where that band actually kind of slides around and it gets rotated around to the back side of the wing, and within a week you won't be able to move that wing band at all because those birds grow so quickly, and that bird will end up getting culled because, you know, you won't be able to see the wing band as that wing grows, and it can also cause a deformity in the wing. So this is a properly placed wing band. The wing bands are tamper proof. If they're properly crimped, you can see the intact rivet on that first wing band that's in the top of that column. And then you can see ones that have been either tampered with or assumed to be tampered with if that ring is not intact. So they do check the wing bands at the livestock shows, and if they look like they've been tampered with, you do risk getting disqualified. Also, if the birds lose the wing band throughout the growth period, those birds are disqualified also. So, you know, you might as well take those out if you have lost wing bands in your chicks. So this is just an example of where the wing bands are pinched in the middle at day 1. And then you really need to check those by day 6 or 7, and possibly even, you know, no later than day 10. But the birds grow so quickly, what you'll need to do at around, you know, day 6 or 7 is to check them, and you may have to spread those wing bands open, and you can spread those apart with a flat-headed screwdriver, and that just allows the wing to be able to grow normally as that bird grows. If you don't spread the wing bands, there's a good chance that the wing is going to kind of grow around that band, and you won't be able to see the number, you know, by the time of the show. So this is just an example of how we spread the wing bands. Basically, we just grab the chicks, sit down with them in your lap, and use a flat-headed screwdriver. You hold the wing band between your fingers, and then just turn that screwdriver up on the edge, and it will spread that band enough where it will allow for the wing to grow. So that's all I have for y'all today. Hopefully you'll have a good project, and will result in success for you and your family with your birds. And if you've got any questions, I know this was longer than an hour, and I apologize, but if you've got questions, I'll be glad to try to answer any of those.
All right, Mr. Clay, do you have any questions tonight?
Do more than one person and family show
Yes, Clay, that's a good question. When you order your birds, say if you had a brother or a sister that wanted to show, and if y'all wanted to order birds as a family, you can do that. So if you ordered, 50 or 75 birds, they could be in both your name and a sibling's name. And then y'all could pull your birds from within that group of chickens. You also have the option if you had a sibling where you could order a set of birds and then they could order a set of birds, and you wouldn't be able to share those, but you would have your own set, that you could pick from for your pen of 3. So Weston and Luke, we order a set for each of them, but if they wanted to share, they could. They could order like one set as a family, or they can order them as an individual exhibitor. So you have options there. That's a good question.
What happens if you get more cockerels and pellets?
Well, you just might have, you never know what you're going to get. Sometimes you can have more cockerels than pullets, and that's okay. I would still cull them down, for the show, and have some good cockerels and your good pullets that you've kept back, and then pick the best ones right before the show, because you want to try to have a real meaty set of 3 birds. And sometimes things don't work out, and maybe you don't have 3 good cockerels, and your pullets are better, so you would take your pullets.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, well, thank y'all very much.
Well, thank you so much for presenting, Rachel. We really appreciate your time tonight. And I think I learned quite a bit actually about the poultry project as well. So it was very thorough.
Good, good. Thank you. Okay, well, if you have more questions, just call me. And thank you for everything. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks, y'all. And y'all have a great
Bye.
All righty. Bye-bye.